Hey guys, welcome to the Mainspringer channel. I'm Parikh, and we're coming fresh off Watches and Wonders. There have been a ton of watch releases that I think are pretty exciting, but this particular video, I want to talk about one specific brand that essentially made their grand debut once again, and this watch brand is Universal Geneve. So let's talk a little bit about them and what's so special about this particular launch for the watch industry. Now, Universal Geneve is a watch brand that started back in the 1890s, and they started to position themselves as a very high-end premium watchmaker, especially from the 1930s on through the 1960s. And they were actually competing almost on the level of where Vacheron, Audemars Piguet, and Patek were. They used to make a lot of their in-house movements. They have an incredible design history of case designs of watches, particularly chronographs. Their most famous watch being the pole router, being designed by Gerald Genta himself, one of his earliest watch designs. And it was designed for the Scandinavian Airlines when they were flying over the North Pole in order to be immune to the magnetic fields that they might experience at that time. So essentially one of the earliest anti-magnetic pilot's watches that was designed. And through the years, the way they have refined the design on their chronographs, they were some of the pioneering watchmakers to use the micro-rotor movement, which proliferated through a variety of their portfolio of watches. With respect to chronographs and calendar watches especially, they have had an incredibly rich design history with some beautiful, aesthetically pleasing chronograph designs, everything from the Nina Rindt to the Space Compacts and several other designs that actually proliferate their portfolio. And while Universal Geneve itself was very prominent among the niche watch collectors, I think it was Ben Clymer from Hodinkee who got the brand to the spotlight in terms of their movement finishing, their designs, and why they were just as prestigious as the vintage Longines, the Pateks, and so on. So they were, again, a very prestigious brand that had been alive prior to the quartz crisis. But just like many other brands, the quartz crisis took this brand down completely, and they never really rebuilt themselves in a very strong fashion. There have been other buyouts and trying to revive the brand, which were really not as successful as the glory days for the brand. And then in 2023, Breitling acquired the brand, and since then they have been trying to place Universal Geneve as their premium brand within Breitling's own tiers of watches. So when they purchased the brand, it was already touted to be more expensive than the Breitling's offerings within this space. And Breitling has a very unique design language, and Universal Geneve, if you look at their back catalog, do have a very unique design language. So there's not a lot of overlap over there. The question was, how are they going to revive this brand? Generally, whenever a historic brand is brought back, they'll probably launch, one watch from that particular brand that was pretty famous, and slowly every year a new model may trickle in, a new design may trickle in, and so on. But sure, Universal Geneve did a few soft launches, I would call it. They released a limited edition of the pole router, the same thing with the compacts, which is essentially their chronograph watches. But this year at Watches and Wonders, or just prior to Watches and Wonders, is really considered the launch year for Universal Geneve, and they literally came swinging out of the gates. Not only did they launch their pole router, but they also launched their compacts watches. They did the Cabriolet, which is essentially a watch that's very similar to the Reverso. It just came 2 years later. And they did a mini disco volante type design, specifically focused on the ladies collection. And then they did a very curated high horology gem set haute couture type version of watches. So they came out not with one watch, but a portfolio of watches, all of which are incredibly well designed, very well thought of proportionally. And these aren't like vanilla looking watches. Obviously, there's like a steel Universal Geneve that you can get on this beautiful brick type bracelet, but they also have gem set stone dials, which are very uniquely done, where they have different stones for the different quarters. And And the Compact's design's very faithful to the original, slightly upsized, but not too much to feel big on the wrist. And they are going for very carefully curated proportions in order to make this launch as successful as possible. And that is very, very interesting to see from a brand that is coming into this space in such a crowded watch market. And I think they're directly taking the fight to brands like Jaeger-LeCoultre and Omega and probably even Breguet. To come this late in the game, but to come out so hot is quite impressive to see what they're doing with their collection. Now, the Compact's watches as a chronograph itself is probably one of my favorites. It's so beautifully proportioned with the lume within the smaller indices hands. It's priced just about the same as a Daytona, which do they warrant that pricing? I'm not entirely sure because, again, they don't have the pedigree that the Daytona has, but then you can never get a Daytona, so does it really matter? Not entirely sure. The movements in these watches, though, are impeccably finished. They are fantastically done. Most of them have a micro rotor type movement, which I believe is, some of them are developed by Breitling, others are probably purchased from La Fabrique du Temps. So there are a few different companies that are providing the parts for these watches. So they're not entirely in-house, but again, I do not place a lot of faith on in-house just for the sake of in-house. You can make garbage in-house, and that doesn't mean it's fantastic quality. So I think at the end of the day, if you're partnering with somebody else to make your movement and the movement is of epic quality, that's all really that matters. In-house doesn't really bear the mark of prestige in my eyes personally. But all in all, I think this is a very strong foot forward from Universal Geneve. Their cabriolet design, especially with the enameling on the back, looks gorgeous. Very beautifully done, very Art Deco type styling, which is something they were extremely popular for. They were the watch company that pushed design, I think, more so than most of the other companies back in the day. They had ellipse watches with fantastic automatic micro rotor movement. They had the White Shadow line of watches, which were these ultra thin, beautifully designed, proportioned watches too. So if you can find any of those in the vintage market, I think those are fantastic buys. Obviously, the more popular ones like the Compacts and so on have skyrocketed in price, so they're not as readily accessible, but the pull routers still are, and you can actually find some really great examples of them in the sub $5,000 range. So definitely something to look out for. But overall, I think Universal Geneve is here to stay, and what they have done is come and very quickly are playing in the big leagues without doing like a incremental launch. And it would be nice to see how collectors respond to this particular brand. Do they quickly carve a niche? Are they in the vernacular of somebody's choice of watches when they're looking for one? I think there's going to be some education of the public because not a lot of people are entirely familiar with Universal Geneve unless you are a watch nerd, and they're gonna have to do some marketing in order to publicize the brand, I feel. And I think they will benefit from some sort of partnership with some celebrities in this area who share the same brand image, value, and probably bring the brand up to speed to the recognition that I personally think it deserves in this particular area. But I'm very curious to hear from folks what they think about this brand. I don't know how many of you are familiar with Universal Geneve. Have you been interested in their vintage watches? What do you think about the catalog of their watch releases this year? Let me know in the comments because I am seriously considering getting one of their watches. I think it's probably going to be a Compacts. Like I said, it's one of my favorites, but I am also curious if this is the right time to pull the trigger because I want to see how the brand does in the market. There are some more compelling chronograph designs in the Compacts line, which I think may come out in the years forward, which I would probably be more interested in those than the ones that are currently released, which I think are the Nina Rent and the Evil Nina, which is like the reverse first version of the Nina Rindt. Let me know in the comments below what you think about this watch. Which of these watches catches your attention? I am always somebody who does not like to buy re-released versions of the watches. Like if I wanted to buy a pull router, I might probably buy the original pull router. But that said, you always get better technology when you buy the newer version of the same watch. And proportionally, I would like to see how any of these watches actually fit on my wrist before I spend my money on them. So let me know your thoughts and comments on Universal Geneve, what you think. If you are new to this channel, appreciate if you can like and subscribe, definitely helps. And that's all I have. Oh, and the reason I'm sitting in my garage is we have some renovation work going on in the house. That is why I am sitting in the garage when I'm making this video, and it's going to be this way for the next few months. So pardon the view, but I don't think you're here for the view anyway. So thanks a lot and have a great day. Take care.